Okay, picking up where we left off on page 319, they're talking about the source document design, like a paper form. And here's an example of a paper form that kind of makes sense. Some sort of a heading, some sort of a control number, some sort of instructions, the body of the form that you're supposed to fill out, maybe some totals down the bottom and some sort of signature or authorization or something. And so these kind of layouts are kind of familiar because they look like a paper form, and sometimes, in fact, sometimes they are paper forms. So, a good layout makes a form easy to complete. You have to provide enough information, enough room to put things in. I hate forms, well, they'll say, what's your address? And it'll give you like this much space to type it, write it in. You kind of go off on the edge. So, bad form design, again, if you're looking at your data, you can tell, how long an address field should be physically. Okay, and it should flow, from top to bottom, from left to right. You guys know all this stuff. And the logical placement, such as the diagram here. On page 320, they talk about the printed reports. And kind of as an overview, they talk about one of the questions you ought to ask when you're asked to produce a printed report. The first question you ought to ask is, why are we printing this? And you'd be surprised. They might go, we always get this report. It's like, no, that's not what I asked. I asked, why do you need this report printed? And it's like, you might find out that you don't need those stupid printed reports. Okay, so why is it being delivered as a printed output? Let me tell you, when I get data, I never want a piece of paper. I want it on a form that I can extract and pop into Excel, do some tweaks. We used to do reporting on data on programs that we wrote. We had a Microsoft SQL Server back in. We had all these forms, and when you print a report, the report came out as an Excel spreadsheet, or the report came out as a PowerPoint slide presentation. Something that was familiar with them, they could pick up and tweak and add. Because if it's just, a PDF or it's just a piece of paper, then that's not very useful. So try to make the output as useful as possible. So don't think of the output as being the terminal use of that report. Think of it as a transition point that they're going to use to do other things. Okay. So who wants the information? Why is it needed? And how often is it going to be needed? What specific information needs to be included? Will the printed output be designed for a specific device? In other words, it's going to be on a wide carriage printer, or a laser printer, or color printer? You need to know those kind of things. When and how the information will be delivered and how often it will be updated. For example, you'd be surprised the number of times they'll say, I want a weekly status report. And you go, but we only update the data once a month. Oh, too bad. I want a weekly status report. Like, okay. Here's your weekly status printout. Okay. And do security considerations come into being? I'll tell you a story. Okay. We designed a system, and it required us to gather Social Security numbers for these customers. And so I fixed it so that only the managers in the office could print a report that had Social Security numbers. The people, the line people sitting at the desk could not produce a report with Social Securities at all. They could see it on the screen, but when they printed or produced an Excel spreadsheet, as an example, Social Security numbers wouldn't come out. How did I do this? Because I went and looked at their trash, and I could find printouts with Social Security numbers on it, and I went, ah! And so no amount of cajoling and prodding and poking them with a stick could convince them that this was a bad idea, that you can't just throw pieces of paper away that have people's names and Social Security numbers on them. So I took it out. I took it out of the report. And only manager can produce a report that has Social Security numbers. Isn't that pretty cool? So I could not trust them. That's a horrible thing to say about my own users. But I could not trust them to not accidentally print a report and throw it away. Or post an Excel spreadsheet on a public network drive. That happened a lot too. So I said, screw that. I'm taking that feature away. You ain't never going to be able to print a report or an Excel spreadsheet that has Social Security numbers in it ever again. Okay, end of story. Picking up on page 321, They talk about the overview of this report process. The organizations tend to strive to reduce the flow of paper. They don't want to kill trees. They don't want to pass paper around. I mean, you guys know this. They would much prefer to receive a report via email or on a public drive or a web page or something. Don't send. I don't want to have a printout appear in my inbox, my physical inbox sitting at my desk. Users find it handy to view screen output. Yeah, and then print all of the information they want. So they may in their business they may say, well, I really need this weekly status report, and so they get this printouts inch thick, and then in reality all they really needed was 5 or 6 items in that 1 inch thick thing. If you allowed them to filter the data the way they wanted and print only the parts they want, then they would be much happy, you'd be much happy, and the forest would be much happy. You wouldn't have to kill quite so many trees. So this report generation thing, we talked about this at the beginning, that report generation used to be the function of the IT department, and now it's in the hands of the users, and the users can produce their own reports. Okay, database programs such as Microsoft Access have a variety of report generating kinds of things. I will tell you, for example, that if you install Microsoft SQL Server and you go in and you say, I want to do a report, what file format does it produce? Do you know? It's an HTML document. It produces the report in HTML. Now, you could just copy that, pop it into a web page, and you're done. Or you could just send it to somebody, and when they launch it, it just launches the browser and everything is there, and you can still copy, light up and cut and paste kind of scenario out of the HTML. It still allows that. So if they really wanted to throw it into Excel, they could just light it up, go to Excel, go paste, and boom, all their data would be there. So it's a quick and dirty and doesn't take up hardly any room because HTML is relatively small. Okay, on page 322 they talk about the various types of reports. This is kind of boring kind of part, so I'm just going to go through it really quickly. Talk about a detailed report, an exception report, what went wrong. That would be a good thing to have. And then summary reports. And again, you guys can read that section. It's not all that exciting. So on page 322, they talk about the user involvement in designing these reports. That there are some guiding principles. It's supposed to be an attractive and professional and easy to read. That kind of makes sense. It should provide totals and subtotals wherever it's appropriate. The analyst should consider design features such as report the headers and footers and page numbers. I will tell you that I've seen reports where you drop it on the floor and you pick it back up and you realize there's no page numbers, and you're going, geez, where does this page go? So yeah, having headers and page numbers is very, very important. Okay. So there are some principles here that talk about page headers and footers. We just mentioned that. Every page should have a report header. So for example, like if you had rows and columns and across the top is, the headers telling you what these things are, but it only appeared on the front page. And so when you flip to the second page, there's no headers anymore. No. I want those headers on every single page to show me what those columns are. So if I pulled one page out of context, I won't have to go back to the first page and go, what the heck is in that third column? So yes, page headers and footers, every single page. And of course this, consistent design, you can sit there and talk with the users to come up with these things. Okay, on page 325, they talk about the technology issues associated with this. And, it used to be screen and print was the only thing we had. That was the only output things we had. Now, of course, you can do all sorts of other things. The web-based delivery, that's always a cool thing. There are companies that produce their quarterly reports directly to the web. And, the CEO wants to see what the quarterly report is. They just have a hyperlink on his desktop that points to they don't actually produce paper copies at all. That's actually pretty cool. Other output technologies, and we're going to go through this rather quickly because, again, there's not going to be anything in here that you haven't heard of before, I hope. For example, you could do a mass email to people to tell them things that are out there. Blogs, instant messaging. They even going on talking about use of wireless technologies and multimedia formats. Podcast, fax machines, and then output to microfilm. Microfilm is probably still used in a few areas for archiving, but to tell you the truth, I haven't seen microfilm in quite some time. Okay, on page 327, they talk about the output technologies one more time, talking about the output directly to media. For example, instead of producing a report, I'm going to produce a CD-ROM. I'll produce the entire thing designed strictly to go to a CD-ROM or a movie format or whatever, some sort of a digital format. And then they talk about specialized forms of output, which is kind of cool. Talk about portable web-connected devices, retail point of sale. You know what I'm talking about. Where, I go into a store and I get a receipt print. And a little strip of paper is about this wide. Specialized output devices that are designed specifically for a particular function. So basically, a sales strip coming out of a point of sale is a specialized output format. Okay. Next, we're on page 328. They talk about some input technologies. And the old way, of course, is keyboard and mouse. I mean, we've been doing keyboard and mouse for a long time now, and a lot of people are kind of familiar with that. But there are other emerging technologies out there, voice recognition being one. And the next one is kind of the motion and gesture kind of thing. Microsoft Kinetics and, the new Samsung phone and all those kind of things where you, wave of your hand and it makes it go do things. So let's go through that. In the early days, you had batch input. I would have all my input all put together and it would just run through in one solid batch. And then, of course, we have the online input where I'm actually touching the data as the things occur. So it's, I'm entering data right then and there. It goes directly into the database right there. It doesn't have to wait for like midnight or something. Now, you might think, well, yeah, that makes sense. Well, there are scenarios where batch actually makes a little bit of sense. Let's say, for example, you've got a scenario where the computer processing is really being taxed in the middle of the day. You might elect to go to batch processing for something. Not that the user would know it. They'd be entering screens, and it'll just be saving it someplace. And then at midnight, it pulls all those guys in and processes them all. So yes, batch processing for input still exists, and sometimes it's even a good idea. And then, of course, the other one is source data automation, where you take the pesky human out of the equation. So using barcode readers and CAC cards and all those kind of things where you can enter data quickly with a swipe of a wand or something rather than typing. So take the human out of the loop, and the quality of the input is going to actually go up. And just like output technologies that are specialized, you have specialized input technologies, like the keypads for, when you use your debit card, those kind of things, very specialized point of sale type of input things. Again, card swipe, I go up to the grocery store and I pull out my debit card and I, do a mag card reader or some sort of smart card kind of a scenario. A lot of people use barcodes, produce barcodes so they can do user input very nicely. Okay, so again, on page 321, talk about, retail stores use portable barcode readers to go in and do inventories, for example. Libraries use handheld scanners to make sure all the books in the racks are the books that are supposed to be. I've seen a library that had an RFID tag, where quite literally they could inventory the entire library by just knowing what books went out the door and which ones came back, because every time a book went through the door or came out the door, they knew about it. Isn't that pretty cool? So you didn't actually have to have a check-in kind of system. Okay, we're coming up to the 15-minute mark. We only got a little bit more to go, but we'll pick this up again in just a few minutes.